approval of the agenda. Are you ready to go there, Hooks, or?
We are.
Okay, thank you. And late items?
There is one late item that refers to item 6.1, which is the moving to the committee of the whole. It specifically relates to the committee of the whole agenda, yeah. So we can get to
Okay.
that. No other late items.
All right, thank you. And move approval of the agenda. Does anybody have anything else they want to put in there? Maureen? Moved it. Second. Sue Ellen, all in favor? Thank you. Passed. And public comments. Do we have anything? Anybody on the list? Disappointing. Okay, so the consent agenda. Does anybody have anything they want to? Okay, Maureen, we got
3.3.
3.3.
It's a small.
Put that in the stairs.
Daniel, was it the intention for Sarah to be here this evening?
She is here for the, she's got a couple items on, she is here, yeah.
Yeah, what is it? Okay. So where do you want to put it? 5.3? Anything else anybody want to pull? That's it? Oh, that's wonderful. And somebody move the consent agenda. Thank you, Maureen. Second, David. All in favor? Thank you. Okay, delegations. Holly, Sherry. Holly and Sherry, yeah, nice. Are you coming up to maybe? Good, thank you. Now we're really gonna get you on that ferry. Get the first one.
I'd rather stay on island.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we'll be quite
Welcome,
grateful.
welcome, and thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the opportunity. What we really want to accomplish tonight is to just leave you with the vital conversations report that has been prepared by the foundation. And I'll just tell you a little bit of background on it, and then I'll turn it over to Holly. Before I do that, I'll just say that the foundation is in good shape. We had a pretty good year this year in terms of fundraising, and we're in a pretty good position in each of the fund accounts that are housed at Vancouver Foundation, but are all endowment funds with the exception of one that can make capital grants. And so they're all growing in size. One of the things we'd like to talk about with you outside of this meeting is a closer collaboration with the municipality. We have a few funds that have a very substantial amount of capital in them, or resources in them, and we'd like to find ways of utilizing that effectively. The big one is Maggie Cummins account.
Yeah.
And so that's something that maybe we can talk about
I'm sure we
outside
can.
of this meeting. Yep, that's great. So just to give you an idea of how the Vital Conversations was organized, the first one was undertaken in 2014, and then was followed with one in late 2017. The purpose of it is to determine the needs of the community from the people that live on island and to get their input and suggestions. And then in turn, what we like about the Vital Conversations is that becomes a guide for us in terms of giving, of utilizing the funds in the various endowments and directing them, so that we're directing things at needs that seem to be a priority by residents on the island, and obviously the municipality. And the interesting thing about the conversation is that there is quite a wide participation from all areas of the island, from all interest groups on the island, and it gives you a very good understanding of the things that people feel need to improve and need to be addressed. Just a little bit about how we organized it. We obviously want participation representing the island as a whole, each of the communities and special interests on the island. So we go through a process of identifying those that would participate in the conversation. It is a closed event, and it had this past year, or the past one, and 61 participants, 20 scribes and facilitators. And that broad participation gives us a good pulse, we believe, on the island. The attendees were selected in two ways. 55% of those that attended were identified, interviewed, and we very purposely selected them because of particular interests on the island, ages, and experiences, so that we had a pretty good understanding that we had a really broad cross-section of people on island. And then the remaining 45% was a random draw, so people brought their names forward and said they'd like to participate in it, and we had a very good response on that. The 7 key areas that we identified to be identified or to be probed, 1 was public dialogue, 2 community gathering place, healthcare, civic pride, seniors and marginalized people and their requirements, the environment and mobility and transportation. And all of this is in the report that you've been provided a copy of. And then what we did is identify projects that have been undertaken in these categories and by whom, and compiled a list of the key influencers on those 9 priorities. The committee did, as I mentioned earlier, interview the folks that participated and asked them to also identify 1 or 2 people that would be assistants in the conversation. The participants were guided by an off-island expert facilitator, and the questions that we put to them in this were, when you picture a strong community, what stands out in your mind? What does it look like and feel like? The second was, what is Bowen doing well? And the third was, where does Bowen have opportunities for improvement within our community? So then they were broken up into table groups and identified by the 8 priorities that they would pick which group they wanted to participate in. And then those groups were asked the 4th and final question, what are possible solutions and actions for these improvement opportunities? And it included a discussion of problems and identifying some of the root causes of the problems. And then at the very end, it was an interesting thing. Participants were invited to write a story about a personal vision of success for Bowen Island. And those actually played quite an important role in drafting the conversation text. So I'd like to turn it over now to Holly, who is very involved in the organization of the Vital Conversations. And I do want to acknowledge Sherry Johnson and Edward Watchman. They worked very, very hard in organizing this, did a super job. And unfortunately, Sherry was quite ill today, so she was unable to attend. And I'll turn it over to Holly.
So I'm taking Sherry's place today in presenting some of the findings of the report which you have in your agenda. So the 2017 Vital Conversations report provides our residents, the local government, and our charitable organizations guidance in what's truly important to us today. It sets the priorities for what will continue to strengthen Bowen. When we focus our efforts on the issues that are important to our community, we're working towards delivering Bowen's brand promise, which is better for being here. Based on the discussions and stories from the Vital Conversations event, we were able to create a picture of the Bowen Island we want to be. Here's that vision. And these are quotes from the report. Bowen Island is our community, our home. It is a place of safety and belonging, a place where the young learn from the old and the old learn from the young. On Bowen, we encourage and accept everyone, where all are respected, all voices heard. Our differences make us stronger. Here, all have options for secure and affordable shelter. Our vulnerable are safe and warm. Those who work on Bowen can live on Bowen. On Bowen, everyone has convenient and timely access to on-island healthcare, professional resources, and services when we need them. Bowen is a place where the protection of our natural environment, our greatest asset, is carefully considered in every decision we make. We live harmoniously and in concert with Mother Nature. Bowen is a role model for green living, bringing positive change into the world. Bowen is a place where the community gathers frequently with friends and neighbors, giving us the opportunity to share our stories and strengthen our bonds, surrounded by support and caring. On Bowen, we collectively take responsibility for raising the next generation with strong values and dreams. Bowen is a place where we give back, do our part, are involved, a place where we are all united in our efforts to do and be the best we can. Bowen Island is our community, it is our home. So the vision of Bowen, encapsulated from the 2017 Vital Conversation report, were 8 priorities. One was develop housing for all, bring healthcare close to home, support our youth, celebrate diversity and inclusion, increase our volunteer pool, expand our transportation options, create gathering places for all, and take responsibility for the stewardship of our environment. Now, some of these priorities are holdovers from the 2014 Vital Conversations, the community gathering place, healthcare services, environment, mobility, and transportation. So obviously, we haven't checked those off of our list quite yet. And though not singled out in its own priority area, seniors was raised frequently and provides a unique opportunity for improvement. Issues pertaining to seniors were mentioned in a number of the 8 priorities. Seniors were mentioned in housing, healthcare, gathering places, and transportation. So participant felt that solutions in all these areas must also consider how they impact seniors. So along with identifying the community priorities, the Vital Conversation participants brainstormed solutions and actions. We didn't just want to hear what their gripes were. So some of those solutions and actions were to create and maintain an up-to-date and accurate database of the Bowen housing market to better understand and monitor the ongoing housing situation, including short-term rentals. They also identified approach local organizations and government to provide funding opportunities and bursaries for professional development and training for local residents, primary providers, and responders in such areas such as emergency medicine, home care aides, workers, and mental health. Another one was work with the West Vancouver School District to encourage the required youth volunteer time be completed on Bowen, because we have high school students who are required to do a certain number of volunteer hours. We should utilize them on Bowen. Develop a community charter that commits all community initiatives to support and encourage diversity, and then explore the criteria to become a best practices community for environmental stewardship. Now, a critical realization that emerged from this Vital Conversation and has to be kept in mind moving forward is that these priorities cannot be tackled solely on their own independently from one another. For better or worse, a solution for one can impact another. Opportunities and solutions should be approached strategically with an eye to both the short term and the long term, careful consideration of all intended and unintended consequences. So Bowen Island is our community, it is our home, and by tapping into our shared emotions and aspirations and by focusing on the priorities that the community has set forth in the Vital Conversations report, we can be better and we will be better. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maybe just point out too that the thinking is that we would do this every 3 years. So that would likely suggest that we will repeat it in 2020. And again, it becomes a guide then as to how we allocate funds that are dispersed from the various accounts that have been formed.
I guess it's a little early to see any trends in the Vital Conversations since there's only been 2 of them, but did you notice anything that was categorically different from the first one?
The differences between the first and second one, well, the first one we had 7 priorities, the second one we had 8, so that's one thing. There was the one that sort of came out as something different was volunteerism, and that was a new topic that came out. So the new priority that came out in the 2017 was increase our volunteer pool. And that came out through a number of areas. All these initiatives that are taking place on island really require a lot of volunteer effort. And I'm sure, as you know, your job is partly volunteer as well. And with the community groups and charitable organizations on island, there's also the very real aspect of volunteer burnout. That there's some great ideas and initiatives taking place, but volunteers burn out after a certain number of years when nothing is accomplished. So that was a new priority.
Okay, so that actually did come up in the conversation. It wasn't something.
It also resulted in our funding as one of the grants last year, a grant to Snug Cove House.
Yeah.
Because they were they're going to be dependent on some volunteer support. And so they wanted to put a real effort into identifying, the support that they might receive and how do they employ it or deploy it, basically, to provide support for the residents at Simcoe.
Perfect.
And you can find more information on all of this, bowenfoundation.com. We're in the midst of our grant cycle right now, and so we put the call out to the community for our community impact grants. And we've had some really great grants over the past number of years, and we look forward to having some more opportunities to partner with charitable organizations and the municipality on these initiatives.
And you're well aware, I think, of two, one legacy and one pledge that we received. And it's indicative, we are seeing quite a number of people approach us that want to make their gift through the Bowen Island Foundation. One of the reasons is that it's been managed in terms of investment, and you can get a higher earning, because we pool all of the various funds are pooled basically to get a much better rate of return on the invested funds. And there is another large pledge, certainly under discussion at this point in time.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
It's a credit to the organization. Thank you very much. Anybody else got anything, questions, or David?
Just make a comment. I just want to thank you. I remember when the foundation started about, I don't know, maybe around 15 years ago or so.
Yeah.
I mean, how much it's grown, it's fantastic. And the fact that you take your job strategically so that you're looking, finding out from the community where to put the resources. And our own opportunity to give is so tiny here, our little community grants, that the fact that you can actually do way more is really important. Otherwise, it's,
Thank you.
Allison?
The volunteer pool, that's the problem with all the foundations and everybody's identifying
Yeah.
across the country.
Not to be negative, I'm an optimist by nature. One thing I would tell you is that we found this year that things were a little slower in terms of coming forward with donations. Now, that's against a backdrop of over $2 million that was pledged. But, and I've certainly had conversations with a number of people. There is a little bit of feeling of burnout. There's so many different fundraising initiatives going on. So that's something we have to think about, just exactly how we can position things to
Financial burnout,
I guess another way we're looking at partnering with the foundation is the Neighborhood Small Grants Program.
Yeah.
Raj and I met with Holly and Joanne Gassman about it, and we'll be getting back to you very shortly, but we would be using a municipality to help funnel these funds out to neighborhoods effectively.
Very small grants.
Yeah, very small grants.
And I think, I'm sure they advised you that we are in the very early stages of looking at a special fund for youth, troubled youth, that need support and assistance.
Wonderful, thank you. So,
If it's any help, I have, as a longtime friend of Maggie Cumming when she was alive, I have files from the beginning of when the foundation was beginning, and some of the things that were talked about and that kind of thing. And I understand the challenges, because I've been working from my side of trying to get projects going. And now we have a new parks plan. There's a regional conservation plan. We've been talking about watershed, and she had watershed education as one of her things. So I'm still very interested in helping with the Maggie Cumming legacy. So and helping Bim, because she directed part of it at Greenways, and I'd be happy to meet anytime, or maybe we can get Bruce Grail back involved or something like that. So
That would be very helpful. I mean, this is all public information, but that fund is now sitting at almost $290,000.
yeah.
And we're only giving out in a year 5,000 or less.
Yep.
And in fact, I mentioned it to Kathy, is that we had the 2 grants that we provided this past year. We'd like to see those taken up.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the one in particular. It would really be good if we could find, if we could find an initiative that might say take 10,000 a year for 3 years. That's sort of what we're thinking.
Yeah. Good.
And
Okay.
it fits with the criteria that
Yeah.
Maggie.
And I'm still chair of the Parks, Trails, and Greenways Association, so I'll put that on the agenda.
Yeah,
Again.
that'd be really helpful.
Thank you.
That's fabulous. Anybody else? Well, thank you
Thank
guys
you very
very
much.
much. I really appreciate it, and thank you for the foundation. It's such an amazing organization, and thank you for everything you do.
Thank
The
you.
Vital Conversations is an amazing asset for the community. Thank you for that also.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very
Okay,
much.
take care, you guys.
Take care, have a good meeting.
Yeah. All right. Sure. Yeah. Great, yeah.
Hi,
Go
Sarah.
ahead. Yeah, thanks.
So council's received a covenant amendment request for 1773 Olivia Terrace in King Edward Bay, as you can see there. The applicant would like to amend the areas of the building envelopes and increase the size of the garage building envelope in order to construct a concealed boat and trailer parking area. The amended building envelopes also allow for less disturbance of the site and eliminates the need for blasting. So the recommendation is that council authorize staff to release the restricted covenant and register the amended covenant that they have proposed.
That's it.
I'm happy to move the recommendation, I know the law, and I know what they're proposing to do, and the local community is supportive of it, and supporting it, so I'm quite happy to support it and move it.
I guess that's right in the hood, eh?
If I could throw a stone to it.
Okay, because that would have been my question is, one of these reports, and I don't know if it was this one or the other one, said that the strata,
Yeah, both, actually both the
Approved. They're
covenants
both
have
approved by
received
the
letters
Strata?
from Strata, yeah.
yeah, well. Second?
I'll second it.
Good.
Because I
Any discussion?
remember when the King Edward, you don't want me to talk, you want me to
I
hurry
do.
up?
No, I said, any discussion?
I
Let's
remember
go.
when the covenants were established, it was because they went seeking specific little building envelopes that would work and most protect the environment. And I think a small tweaking to prevent more blasting and to prevent more clearing is in keeping, especially if the rest of the strata go with that. So that's the best kind of development variance permit to do, except it's a little different.
Yes.
So I'm in support.
It does still comply with our setbacks and whatnot.
Anybody else? I'll ask a question. All in favor? That's unanimous. It's passed.
Great. I'll see it quick for the next one then too. So we've also received a request to register a new covenant on 1771 Emily Lane, also in King Edward Bay. They want to expand the building envelope in order to construct a garage. There's a hydro pole right now, and with an existing carport, that makes it a bit difficult to access. So they want to take that carport out and construct a new enclosed garage in a better alignment. So the recommendation is that council authorize staff to register the new covenant for the new building area.
What are the details on the covenant?
Well, just, it allows them to build in an expanded area, like 32 square meters more further. And it also has the building overhang clause that's been added in there,
Yeah.
basically just meaning that the building can project outside of the building area, I think by 3 feet or so.
But not in the building, but.
But not the building, that's just the overhang, so the roof and whatnot.
Sue?
This time you haven't mentioned anything about whether it helps or harms the environment or whether there's blasting required. Can you tell us about the impacts?
Yeah, I mean, they're not changing the alignment of the driveway and they're not removing any additional trees or anything like that. They did note that in there, but the main purpose for this is just so that they can get a better alignment for the garage versus the carport that's there. The impacts on the property are said to be minimal.
Do you have a,
I have.
where's that photo of the,
No,
There? Well,
this one, I don't know if either of them really show it.
pretty hard.
so it-
I don't know.
That's-
Yeah,
yeah,
that's the covenant.
so which is the part that's going away and which is the part that's coming?
This one is not actually taking anything away, it's just adding that extra area there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, the other one is to replace the covenant, but this one is just to add a new covenant that would expand it.
All right, we have a second.
Amending the existing covenant, not.
It's not amending it, this one is registering a new covenant in addition to the existing covenant on the property.
Maureen, were you gonna second that?
I moved it.
Okay, Allison second. Any further discussion? I'll ask a question, all in favor? Thank you, that's unanimous. Now, just hang in there because we've got
Yes,
3.3.
I don't because of the canvas, but.
Maureen's.
Yes.
Sarah, it's just
Yes.
a tiny point in your bylaw, the heavy truck amendment bylaw, just the word is licensed with an S rather than a C, and that's the formal,
Okay.
that's what transfer.
Yes, I know, I've researched this before, so it's the
Yeah,
C.
there you
I
go.
will make sure. Which section were you referring to in here? I know.
It's point 3.3, so the heavy truck amendments bylaw, and throughout, just the term is used and just needs
Okay.
to be corrected.
I'll just make sure that all of them are.
Okay, so I'll read the recommendation. That bylaw number 475, 2018, cited as Bowen Island Municipality Traffic and Use of Streets bylaw number 133, 2005, heavy trucks amendment bylaw number 475, 2018, be read a second and third time as amended.
Right, second. Thank you, Sue Ellen. Any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you, it's unanimous. Hey, Sarah?
Sarah?
Bob Robinson?
No, that's 3.4, that's.
Yes.
We're at 6.1, I think.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
We have about half an hour there.
Do we want to deal with
That's what I was wondering,
8.1?
Yeah, why don't we just keep going?
Okay, yeah, so we'll move on, because we won't go to that committee of the whole right now, and we'll go to 8.1, so that'll be Daniel.
Okay, so thank you, Mayor and Council. So today it is a rezoning application at 431 Bowen Island Trunk Road, which is the Union Steamship Marina. So located immediately adjacent to the ferry terminal. So just some background. So it's zoned, the marina portion of the property is zoned WC1A, which is Water Commercial 1A zone variation. So that allows a number of uses, but including marina and public wharf. It allows float house as an accessory use. And then in conditions of use in the zoning, float house is limited to 2% of marina berths, subject to permanent connection to sewer pump out facilities for land-based sewage disposal. It limits each float house to a maximum size and height, maximum floor area for buildings and structures on the water. And our land use bylaw currently defines float house as a building containing a dwelling unit designed to float on water, but it's not intended or suitable for navigation. And there's currently 150 marina berths in the marina, so it allows up to 3 float houses, each with a single dwelling unit. So the applicant would like to amend the zone to permit up to 6 floating buildings, so I should say 6 additional floating buildings on top of that was permitted, with up to a total of 16 dwelling units to house staff workers. The buildings would have a footprint of approximately 55 square meters and would have 2 or 4 dwelling units for each building, but up to that total of 16 units. So this has come before council a number of times. We had a public hearing in October, at which point the applicant amended his development plan. It came back to council on November 13th, 2018, which was still the previous council. And at that meeting, council rescinded first and second reading of the bylaw, and they gave first reading to the bylaw as amended to match the new development plan. At that meeting, council referred the bylaw to the Islands Trust, to the Advisory Planning Commission, the Housing Advisory Committee, the Snug Cove Sewer Local Management Committee, and council directed staff to report back at second reading to address council's concerns relating to sewage management and treatment for the proposed units. So what I have in this presentation in my report is an overview of those referrals and some discussion on housing and sewage. So the Islands Trust said that the bylaw is not contrary to or at variance with the Islands Trust policy statement. So for new councillors, Islands Trust reviews all our zoning bylaws, and they provide comment if it meets the Islands Trust policy statement. So that's typically the only statement we get back, is that it's not contrary to or at variance to Islands Trust policy statement. The Advisory Planning Commission met in December to discuss, and so they had a number of recommendations. So they were interested in how we measure the building height, level, recommending to measure from the deck instead of from the water level. Part of the rationale being that as you add more weight to a floating house, it goes lower, and so the height becomes actually a moving target. And so measuring from the deck, they felt was more consistent. We talk about building code compliance, and one change to the definition of floating attached dwelling to read containing. Before it read containing up to 4 dwelling units, they wanted 2 to 4 dwelling units to distinguish it from float house, which is one with a single dwelling unit. They want to say floating attached dwellings have multiple, so they have 2 to 4 instead of a single. The Housing Advisory Committee met on December 7th, and they just made a motion they support the proposed bylaw. The Snug Cove Sewer Local Management Committee met in January, and they had a number of comments. So, as way as background, so these buildings are proposed to be built with an onboard sewer treatment plant that would discharge treated water into the ocean, and then the solids would remain inside this system that would get pumped out, similar to how a septic tank will pump it into the sewer septic field, but the solids remain in the tank to be pumped. So in that way, they would not be connected to the Snug Cove sewer system on an ongoing basis. So currently the office building at the marina is connected, has a permanent connection, and so does one of the existing float houses, the other existing float houses in the marina. But this is proposed to be an onboard treatment system. So you saw from that motion in November, Council had questions about how exactly that would work. So the Snug Cove Sewer Local Management Committee recommended, so one, that when it's pumped out, that it not be pumped into the municipal sewer systems, because some concerns about that amount of water entering the system, and also just that if they're not part of the system, they're not paying into the system, they don't get to pump into the system as well. The second one is probably more substantial, so they say, okay, what we want to see is it be monitored quarterly to start with the system. So the system that is being installed has been approved by Environment Canada, meets sort of certified testing to be a, I forget what the BC float approved system, but what the Snug Cove Sewer said is, regardless of that, we want testing every quarter to show that it is working accordingly, so that we know that, okay, that's not, it's not causing any issues, and so quarterly for the first year, and then annually after that, and then also that you do a manual inspection of the tank to make sure it hasn't been damaged. So in terms of the bylaw that's before you, changes from first reading, so staff are proposing essentially the amendments recommended by the ABC, so changing that definition, changing the measurement of the height, and increasing the height to 6 meters. So the applicant, you'll see in the report, there's sort of a site plan of how the units are proposed to be built. The 4plexes would exceed the 5.5 meter height limit. They come out at about 5.7 or 5.8 meters to the height, so to increase the height to allow that revised building plan. And so this is what previously had been discussed, and this is presented to the Housing Advisory Committee as well, that we would be entering into a housing agreement with the applicant that would limit the use of the 6 floating buildings. So it would allow commercial guest accommodation in the winter months, knowing that the applicant's intent is to house summer staff workers during the summer, so that rather than have them remain empty or on short-term lease, that they would be available for overnight accommodation in the winter, but not in the summer. It also requires that the units be first made available to people who are working on bonds, so similar to covenants we have above the pub, for example, it's a similar covenant. So the applicant's goal is to house his own workers, so Union Steamship workers there, or dock mooring workers, but from municipality point of view, we would say that it'd be people working on bonds, or people working at the grocery store, at the pub, or at Ready. From our point of view, it's all one and the same. Secondly, then, this is coming out of the Snug Cove Sewer, is a covenant placed on title, so outlining requiring those quarterly tests and the annual tests of the effluent. So this is from our Public Works manager as well, in terms of what exactly they're testing for, the visual inspections, and making sure that the solids are pumped into a private pumping company. So with that recommendation, the recommendation would be to give second reading to bylaw 461 as amended, to refer the bylaw to a public hearing, and then direct staff to prepare those 2 covenants, the housing agreement and the sewer.
Daniel, so when he pumps, so he's not pumping into the municipal sewer, but he's pumping into a private, he's being pumped out by a running,
Yeah.
or does it have to go off island, or what is it?
So that's what's coming from the sewer and from Public Works, is that it go essentially into one of the trucks that would come on to pump it.
Oh, okay.
Just like a septic pit.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So it doesn't go to Ronnie's pump out?
No, so not to use on this pump out,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay, perfect. Anybody, Sue Ellen first, yeah?
I have a question. I was all involved in the sewer discussions and I was on that committee, so if anybody, you know. But the 5.5 meters in height, we didn't refer this to the fire department, but maybe that's been done in-house. I know there's limits on this height of public buildings because that's how high the trucks can reach and stuff like that. Is there any concerns for fire safety?
So this initial rezoning application was referred to the fire department. I haven't referred that increase in height. I mean,
It's less than the 29 feet that we have in the
Yeah.
existing land use bylaw.
yeah, so most properties on Boulder are 9-meter height limit, and in some, like the pub can go, I think is 11 meters or 12 meters.
Thank you, that's fine.
Allison?
Okay, one little question. I'm having a little trouble sorting out one time I know. You're talking about visual inspections take place annually. So are they, and have you got that in the actual bylaw? Did I see that in here or not?
No, so that's not proposed to be in the bylaw, but it's in a separate covenant
Okay.
title.
But, and then you're referring to tests being provided.
Yeah.
So it's not, it's the result of the inspection, not the test, right?
No, so it's to test it.
No, but the second bullet says
Yeah.
visual inspections take place annually and the results of the tests. Well, when you do a visual inspection, you're not doing any tests, you're just inspecting.
Sure, so the
Visual.
results of the inspection, yeah.
So I think you might need to, yeah. So the solids pumped from the floating buildings not be pumped into the municipal sewer system, but rather done by a private pumping company. So are they gonna take it all out of them? Yeah. So then over here on the bylaw, it says floating attached dwelling and float home use is only permitted as an exception and is subject to a permanent connection to a sewer pump out facilities for land-based sewage disposal. So that doesn't.
Where are you at there?
I'm on the sub F in the bylaw.
Right.
4.1.3 sub 2 sub F.
Yeah.
So they don't seem to match.
Right, so the subsection F then says or a sewage disposal system approved by Vancouver Coastal Health.
But if we're not, if we're gonna have a covenant that they can't connect to the sewer system.
It
Yeah,
says
that-
is subject to a permanent or a
Yeah,
sewage
but I
system.
guess why even offer the permanent
Right,
when
yeah.
we said, or as part of the reason for the testing and the checking is that ultimately they may be able to connect.
So they would be able to connect, now like part of the issue, so our float home zoning says you have to be permanently connected to a land-based sewer. So when I originally wrote the bylaw, it was to say, okay, or they could be permanently connected, or
Okay.
this is their alternate that they want to do.
And Vancouver Coastal Health hasn't weighed in yet, or has this been referred to Vancouver Coastal?
It's been
Health?
referred to them, and I've heard from them. I have not heard in writing from them that they're okay with the system.
Okay. Thank you.
Rob?
And then just a rationale around during summer months, workers, winter months, and what does that comprise winter months? What time frame is that?
So winter months, October to March. So that's essentially the operations of the marina and the dock, they ramp up employment significantly in their summer period, which they start, May 1 is when they start summer
Yeah.
forage as opposed to winter. And so the rationale went, okay, they're looking to house workers when they're employed from May until September.
Yeah.
To basically empty the rest of the time. Are they only able to lease them for 6-month periods? The applicant's goal is then to use them for like contractors coming on island who are looking for nightly accommodation over the winter.
So just a
Yeah.
hypothetical, somebody
Yeah.
works at the marina for the summer, then in the winter time, no work, they go work at the pub or something
Right,
like that,
yeah.
and wash dishes. Are they gonna be asked to move out of the float home, or are they gonna stay there?
Not necessarily.
You said offered first to employees on the
Yeah.
island.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know offhand, like I know part of the goal is for the permanent employees to have a shot, but then, yeah, so I don't know.
Because that would be my worry, that we're sort
Yeah.
of creating a, very temporary, and they have to move out, and then
Yeah.
they're stuck now without housing, and, because, I mean, yeah, they're busy in the summer, but like, as far as bed and breakfast, they're also busy this summer, right? Everybody's
Yeah.
busy this summer. In the wintertime, everybody's more quieter, right? And
Yeah.
although I can see with some workers, especially with building and all that, maybe that will stay busier in the winter. So I'm just concerned with how those people, what's gonna happen to those people at the end of the season. And-
Allison, did you find that?
Well, I think you covered that in the housing agreement, haven't you, which says limiting the use of the buildings for commercial guest accommodation to the winter months and requiring that the units be first made available to those people working on Bowen.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you were in the summer and then you're still living and working on Bowen, then theoretically
Yeah.
that would, but I think it's something that should be clarified. I was just assuming
Yeah.
that if you started there and you found another job on Bowen, then you'd stay there.
I'm just concerned about the use of winter months. The specified months are 6 months of the year, so it's not
Yeah.
just winter. You need to find another way of
Sure,
describing that.
sure. Yeah, I borrowed their winter and summer seasons in there. It's not 3, but it's 6 months.
Is that defined anywhere?
In the bylaw itself, it
It
just
is.
lists months, it doesn't list seasons.
Because presumably also rents would go up for for people that are renting privately in the winter time as well, I take it. It wouldn't stay the
You
same
mean in the summer
rates.
they'd go up?
Well, for the workers, it'd probably be lower rate, I'm assuming, and then when the workers, they
Right, it's
move out,
hourly, or not hourly, but it's a night.
daily
rate.
or whatever, like
Yeah.
a B&B or something like
Yeah.
that. Hmm.
Maureen?
When are you thinking, assuming this passes, when are you thinking of bringing this to public hearing?
And we're doing it like a month?
In a month? The reason I'm asking is I'm wondering if it might be possible for us to see the housing agreement before it goes to public hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, like if I sent that for information to like a council meeting before we schedule the public hearing, or, yeah, okay.
The resolution does say that the housing agreement and sewer covenant be included in the public hearing material.
Yeah, but I think that we might have feedback on the housing
Yeah.
agreement that would be helpful and perhaps make the public hearing
I agree.
more informative.
So we could just book the public hearing a little bit later in order to accommodate this other council.
Yeah.
Yeah, be brought to council prior to
Yeah,
being
make that
included in
clear.
the public hearing material.
And then if there is feedback, give enough time before we have to advertise for the public hearing.
For sure.
Any further discussion? Somebody want to, I'll read the recommendation. The bylaw number 461, 2018, cited as Bowen Island Municipality Land Use Bylaw number 57, 2002, amendment bylaw number 461, 2018, be read a second time as amended, and the council refer bylaw number 461, 2018 to a public hearing, and the council directs staff to prepare a draft housing agreement and sewer covenant based on conditions outlined in the January 18, 2019 report from the manager of planning and development, and that the housing agreement and the sewer covenant be included in the public hearing.
You need to
material.
add being brought to
Yeah.
council prior to being
Oh.
included.
I would just remove the sentence about scheduling the public hearing,
Yeah.
and we will
Oh,
bring
okay.
that recommendation forward when we bring the housing agreement.
Yeah.
Well, it is
Yeah.
talking about being scheduled, so it's saying the housing agreement and sewer covenant be brought to council prior to the public hearing?
I like the simplicity of just drawing a line through
Yeah.
that council refer the bylaw to a public hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Carrie read it so fast.
And okay, so we're just taking out that one sentence and putting the council direct staff for, okay, you got that help?
And then are you taking out after that last clause, then you just take out and that they be included in the public hearing material and just say, you directed me to prepare a housing agreement and a covenant?
Yeah, so I would remove that, yeah, and then remove the last paragraph as well.
What do you mean, the housing?
The last
agreement?
Draw a line
Yeah.
through the last sentence.
We can bring that recommendation forward after we bring the housing agreement forward to council.
Yeah, but we still want in this recommendation that the housing agreement and sewer covenant be brought to council prior to any public hearing. Otherwise, they don't open the hearing.
The housing agreement and sewer covenant be presented to council, so you.
I think if we just remove those two sentences, we will be bringing back the housing
Yeah.
agreement for
Yeah.
council's consideration.
But we haven't said that in the resolution.
But it's part of the process, it has.
Not necessarily. So how will the council direct staff to prepare a draft housing agreement sewer covenant and bring them to council for their consideration?
Okay.
Sure.
And then you can take up that.
Happy hope?
Happy.
That's the last sentence.
What do you think about just for consideration prior to a public hearing at the end of that sentence?
That's fine with me.
Yep.
Thank you.
We have a second? Thank you, Maureen. Any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you, unanimous. Okay, we're gonna go back to new business, 6.1. We're gonna move to a committee of the whole at this time. And the agenda for the committee of the whole
In blue.
is in blue, correct? So the approval of the agenda, is there any items? No, there isn't. We're done with
Just
the.
the letter from Robin.
We did have one.
Yeah.
Just make sure that one's on. Hi, Robin. Hello, everybody.
So can I have approval of the agenda? Thank you, Maureen. Second, David. All in favor? Thank you. And we'll move on to new business. Robin?
Hello.
Fenton. Howdy.
How's everybody doing?
Welcome. Very well, thank you.
I will, sorry, no, that's okay. I'll
Way
just
to
make
go.
sure this is ready. Yeah, I'll jump in. I rehearsed this today and it was 13 minutes, so I will probably speed over a few things. And then, as I usually do, I talk really fast and I go really fast. And then we'll have time to discuss after, so we can always go back if you have questions. But do put a hand up if you want me to stop and slow down and touch on something. So who we are, I think you're all familiar with Birch, and let me know if you need me to go over it. I'm Robin Fenton, I'm the Executive Director. We have had one change to our board. Anita Leck stepped down, and we have a gentleman named Adam Lougheed who stepped up, so please check out our website to see his bio. A quick update which I sent out today, hopefully you got. The one big bit of news is it's looking very, very promising to get a small amount of funding from Van City for our next phase, the Van City Foundation. So we're in talks with them and it's all looking very positive. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll have 100% confirmation of that. And I've listed out there what we'll do in this next phase, which we're saying will be about 3 months, leading some community engagement and really creating the concept and program for the project, with the goal being at the end of that phase, we'll be prepared to submit for seed funding from CNHC. So we're very excited. And then following that, we'll hopefully be successful in our seed funding, and then we'll actually go further to the next steps, engaging the architects and site works and those kinds of things. So that's for later in the year. So to get on to our core funding application, as you'll see, hopefully you've had a chance to look over our application. We've applied for $25,000 per year for the next 4 years. The program details, going back to 2012, the Bowen Island Municipal Council accepted the recommendation of the Affordable Housing Working Group to form a municipal housing organization. So what we're proposing is that Birch would like to fill the gap that's left, because for a multitude of reasons that organization was never formed. So they recommended in their report back in 2012 for approximately $20,000 to $25,000 per year of ongoing funding and support for that organization. So that's what our request has been based on. And then I followed it up with Appendix A, which listed a whole bunch of roles and responsibilities that was outlined in that report. I'm just going to pull out a few. One was administering the existing and future housing agreements and covenants, and obviously that would be in conjunction with planning staff, but something that we could assist with. Administering an affordable housing wait list, which is something as an organization we're going to have to be dealing with anyways for our own projects, so that's something we could be assisting the municipality with. And performing or administering the annual housing needs update. And one of the things I was really pleased with the Van City Foundation, they wanted us to revise our proposal because they really want to invest in us as an organization, as opposed to just paying us to pay consultants. So they're actually going to be paying us a little bit of money to build our skills, develop our capacity. And so one of the things that I'm excited about is likely not this first housing needs assessment that needs to be done, but perhaps in future ones, we could be building a capacity in our organization to perform those ourselves, which would save, I think, everybody time and money.
in the future when we need to update those assessments. And of course, the big one being writing grants for additional funding. I'll get into more details afterwards, or throughout the presentation. So further details, as you all remember, in May, we partnered municipality with Birch and committed to land. So what this core funding will, what we're asking for is to support our organization with vital operational funds to keep momentum of the project going, which has been absolutely fantastic. Like what we've achieved in 9 months has been, I think, pretty amazing, especially with support of the municipality. And we would give Bowen Island the best chance at success for grant funding from other levels of government. And I've just noted a few of the big things. I've been to 3 affordable housing conferences last year, and these are the big numbers. The federal national housing strategy has $40 billion over 10 years, and BC Housing at provincial level has $6.6 billion over the next 10 years. So there's money out there, and we're really at a good point to apply and go for it and get it for this community. So our current funding, we've had a private donation. We are hoping to get this grant from Benzie. That's to be confirmed, and the amount there is approximate to be confirmed. We got a community aid grant to support our community outreach, our engagement with the community. And the CMHC funding, that's to be confirmed. I'm not quite sure what that amount will look like later in the year. And membership, we've actually deferred that to the following year, just because we've got a lot going on and we've reached capacity. So we'll be exploring membership next year and open that up to the community. So volunteer hours, we've got our board. I sort of listed this as actual, because when I submitted the application, we were in October, I think. So these are actual for this past year and just estimates for next year. But I put in 211 hours last year, and I did get a small honorarium for that, but basically most of that was volunteer. And our board of directors, of course, have put in a lot of time as well. And our advisory group had 1 meeting last fall, but we'll have more this year. So community involvement, this was a question on the application, but I think although we're not directly, like the questions are asked about programming and do we provide, so ours isn't direct providing actual activities or programming, but I hope that providing affordable housing is a pretty direct link for community involvement. Organizational provide, I'm going to skip over this because hopefully you're familiar with this. Again, we can come back. Major partners being the municipality, of course, now Van City Foundation, and we're certainly hoping to be working with BC Housing, CMHC, to get some future funding. Rationale for funding. So similar programs. The only other active housing society I'm aware of is Smethville House, and they're doing an independent living for seniors. So certainly we sort of see ourselves as complementary and not competing with them. Certainly, yeah. So these are the objectives for the OCP that we went through to meet that. So I think I'm just going to go over those, and if we want to come back to those in more detail, we can get back to them. But certainly the one that I found the most relevant for us is to be inclusive and welcoming of residents for varying income levels, lifestyles, and age groups. So I think it's that varying income level that's the really critical one for what Birch is trying to achieve. Sustainability. So this operational funding will allow Birch to continue working towards the construction of our first project, which is the big one on our plate at the moment. Build up membership, volunteer groups, build our fundraising capacity to keep ourselves more sustainable. So we aren't going to be dependent on funding from the municipality forever. We want to build our organization up to be self-sufficient. Provide training opportunities for our executive director and board, build internal capacity, as I explained, getting for our staff and the board, possibly to assist the municipality with those ongoing needs assessments and other roles that we would be pleased to discuss. Supporting research and collaborations, establishing partnerships, those kinds of things. And then I did list out year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, so I don't know where I'm at with time. So I can go through those quickly, or I can kind of, if you've read the application, I can kind of skip over. But generally, this first year is the feasibility, getting the seed funding, getting going. Next year, fingers crossed, would be getting into actual construction or preparing for that. And then certainly on my mind is looking ahead to the next project. Once that first one's underway, what's next? And what can we be doing to create even more affordable housing? So that's where it would take us through to the next few years. And there's things about acknowledging the contribution, and we'd be very happy to work with municipality on how to best acknowledge them for their contributions. We do have a budget there, which again I can go into more detail if we want to talk about it. And what I would like to spend a few minutes talking about, there are precedents, and I did list, and there's the big ones, the Whistler Housing Authority, there's Vancouver, there's City of Surrey, but one of the most interesting ones is the District of Peachland, and I actually was in touch, this is me, this wasn't in the application. I was put in touch with the CAO of District of Peachland, which Elsie I want to say Lemaire.
Yeah, LC, yeah.
Yeah, Lemaire, something, yeah. So our development consultant put me in touch with her, and I just spoke with her last week, we connected. And they just, I think they've either just completed or under construction, they certainly have funding in place for 74 units of seniors housing. And I wanted to get in touch with her just to understand because as it turns out, about 12 or 14 years ago, the municipality essentially created the nonprofit society because they knew that that's what had to happen to get this built. And so essentially most of the board, throughout most of its time, has been made up of councillors. And she was very candid and said that she was impressed that we had a staff member, me, who was doing work, because they have just hired somebody to be a building manager as they're basically about to open. But basically she, as the CAO, did most of the work over 12 to 14 years off the side of her desk, which is what she said.
Retiring.
And she specifically said, I do not recommend it. She said it very plain, I do not recommend it. Her words were, it took a lot of time. And she in fact said that other tasks, other work of hers suffered because she was doing so much work on this project. Wonderful for the community because it's actually now being built and they're getting, they're a comparative community to us. They're about 5,000 people and they're getting 74 units of seniors housing. Like, it's really huge. So a really worthwhile investment, but she did not recommend it. She said that's not how you should do it, and not typical either. They did give, the municipality directly gave in cash to the, because I asked these questions, to the society. The rest was basically in kind for her time. They donated the land in a long-term lease, which was valued at about $1 million. And she said the total contribution was $2.2 million. So I'm thinking that's the land, that's waiving fees, that's probably sewer connections, hopefully her time in kind. I'm not quite sure how they did that full calculation, but that was, I guess, what went on the applications was a $2.2 million contribution from them. So I just thought it was a really good example of how a community's done it, some lessons learned as to not do it, but a successful project, and they're actually there, and it's being built now. So in conclusion, this funding would support our core operations. This investment would be leveraged to create other value towards affordable housing on Bowen. So creating volunteer time, fundraising for additional things, our operations to keep us sustainable, other projects, but the biggest one being the grant applications that will be able to take advantage of these, literally millions of dollars that are being made available. And we have strong support from Vancity. I think I've maybe mentioned this to some of you individually. We have a letter of support from BC Housing, and that's thanks to the work that's been done by council and the past mayor in the past couple of years. Making BC Housing aware of our issues, so they're literally prepared to write a letter of support for this project to get funding. So we're in a really, really strong position to make the most of these funding opportunities that are coming down, and we want to keep the momentum going. And it would help Birch and BIM as partners to realize our long-term goal of creating affordable housing. Thank you, and I'm very happy to go over that now, or if you want to pause and listen to Raj, and then I can come back.
Well, thanks, Robin. No, it's amazing. And we talked about this before, and I think it's, well, we'll see what Raj's presentation is, but I don't know if this is the right avenue, and let's wait for Raj's presentation here, but stay where you are,
Okay.
and we'll have a discussion about it. Anybody else, any comments at this point?
Can I just
Maureen?
ask a question about the city spaces work?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have enough funds in place to do that piece at this point?
Not at this point, no, but if we get the Vancity funding, which is looking very likely, then yes, we do.
Then you would,
For the
okay.
next 3 months, that first phase.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Raj, you want to go ahead with your presentation?
Sure. Well, before I go ahead, I just wanted to thank Robin for her presentation and all the work that she's put in, and she had a very, very strong application. In response to that, I'm sure you've gone through my report. I feel like the Grinch making the recommendation that I am making, but my recommendation was to not consider the core funding, multi-year core funding application at this point in time, and it was strictly based on the available funding that we do have. Currently, we have a total of $140,000 available for grants and aid, for community grants and grants and aid. Of the $140,000, we have 2 multi-year core funding, or 2 organizations that have been approved for multi-year funding. So when you take the commitment that we've made over year funding for those organizations. We only have about $43,000 available per year. Annual applications for grants and aid from organizations usually close to that amount. So if we were to approve, if council were to approve the 25,000 core funding application by Birch, you would only have $18,000 available to give to community organizations. So the recommendation, the reason for the recommendation that, or the rationale behind the recommendation that I made was to allow council to basically evaluate priorities as time goes on and look at what the community needs are in conjunction with Birch's application. Any
All right.
questions? I'd be happy to answer them.
Allison?
I'm looking at, I guess it's the last page of your report, Raj, with the numbers. If I'm reading this right, there was 33,765 in community grants, and then the core funding, so a total amount of 130. So we left $9,795 on the table.
No, I think.
Well, that was last year.
2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So assuming we might have the same situation, and I guess we just approved in a consent agenda the resolution not to allow it to be carried forward
Correct.
That's
from the
correct.
Community Grants
Yeah.
Committee. However, that doesn't mean we couldn't notionally think about it in the budget. So there, yeah, I guess, I'm just trying to understand the numbers.
Actually, Allison, if you were to go to the little chart that is in the report, it shows the budgeted numbers for 2018.
That's
Yeah.
page 5 of 19?
Yeah.
It would be on page 3 of the report.
Right. Yeah.
At the very top of page 3. So that shows the annual budget
Yeah.
of 140,000, what
Yeah,
the core funding grants that have been approved are, and basically the residual remaining amount.
yeah, so there's 97,000 left to give.
40
And if we go.
43,000 available.
Well, your
96
2019
is-
budget, you've got,
96 is the amount of fund, of
Yeah, so you got
multi-year grants
40,000.
that have been approved, yes.
so if we got
So you have
a
about
request
40,
that were lesser than the last time, or we, didn't grant so much credit down, there is some room, I guess, is what I'm saying. Maybe not for the full amount, but.
Maureen?
Question for Raj.
Yes.
What is the maximum that can be given in a grant and aid?
our policy does not specify a maximum, so the maximum would be, I mean, the grant, the multi-year funding comes from the community grants budget. And so, right now, the maximum you could give is up to $43,000, I suppose.
But no one else would be funded.
No one else would be funded, exactly.
I understand the rationale that you're giving in the report, but I also recall every single councillor talking about how important housing on Bowen Island was. So I'd like us to have a conversation that might involve identifying other sources of
Yeah.
funds.
Absolutely.
And given that we just had, I don't know if this is possible, we just had a presentation from the Community Foundation talking about all the priorities that were identified in the Vital Conversations discussion. And they're interested in supporting projects that relate to community needs. This is an identified community need, and doing that in partnership with the municipality. If we don't have the money in this pot and we can't find the money anywhere else, perhaps this is a candidate for a discussion with the Community Foundation. Is it possible? I mean,
Well,
can they fund?
Yeah, that plus the fact that you can put in a request for funding.
To the foundation?
No, and us.
I would suggest that staff be requested to reach out to the Community Foundation. I just think this is incredibly awkward right now, having Robin make her report and then Raj have a. it's-
Oh, gosh, no.
No,
It's
no,
amazing,
I-
it's amazing
for
report,
coun-
they're
For
making
council.
all those
for
statements.
council, yeah.
It puts-
Oh, yeah.
And this is just a committee of the whole, so any recommendation would have to be ratified at the February 11th meeting. And I think rather than council making a decision tonight, that staff reach out to the Community Foundation to see if there's some synergies there. Because I do support what Raj was saying about the limited funds that would be available to the rest of our community for community
Yeah,
grants.
sort of cutting off
And balance
everybody
that
else.
with the work that's being done. So my recommendation would be defer consideration to February 11th. In the meantime, staff will contact the Community Foundation.
Yeah, it's certainly not meant to demean the work you're doing, because it's absolutely fantastic, it's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
It's just, it puts us in a very awkward situation going forward, and I think we need some time to kind of move things around a bit.
Yeah, no,
Figure
and
out a way for it to work.
I do appreciate that. When I saw the report, I absolutely, I don't envy your position that you have, but my job is to come and ask.
Yes, indeed.
And my job is to ask for what we, what I think we need. And certainly what I hope you might consider is, in looking at the money, and of course I wouldn't want us and our organization to deprive other community organizations, so it's a really delicate balance. But what I'd love you to consider would be, we've asked for 25,000, and that would be wonderful. A lesser amount would also be very welcome. So if it ended up being that there's a balance, that it's not 25 and it's something else that's a lesser amount, but would even really help contribute, like literally we have to pay domains and lawyers and insurance every year. Like we just have these ongoing costs that are really challenging to support. So even if there was a lesser amount that you felt we could be committed to, and even if it was something over time, like I say, we'll be working to build our own capacity to
Yeah,
become
absolutely.
self-sufficient. So even if it was something over time, or I did check the policy and it does say up to 4 years, so even if you just wanted to commit to 1 or 2 years, we would be open to that, and we'd appreciate any kind of support you'd be able to give us, because it would really help us move forward. And I love the idea of talking to the Community Foundation, because we're not eligible, because we don't have charitable status. But from what I understand, the municipality does, so if we're partners, which we already are, we would have to approach them and make sure that that was all okay, that that would work for them to be able to pay that money out, and that it was good. But I would very much welcome to do a joint application, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think we just have to find another avenue. I'd love to give to you, but it'd be and I'm on the community grants also, so that, sort of makes me a little bit, not anymore, good. Makes me a little bit sensitive to the whole thing, because it's
Yeah.
always a real struggle for us every year.
I'm sure.
So, and I appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah.
But you can apply for those grants also.
Yes, and my only concern is that's almost 3 months away, and then the decision for that would be
Yeah.
then however many more weeks or months after that. Whereas if we did get a decision, even if it was a lower amount or lesser time, it would be something that we would get sooner that could really help us in this next push. So that's my ask.
I just, I liked what I was hearing from Kathy, and I'm wondering if we have a motion. You can write it away. Did you capture something there?
I did.
Okay, what do you have?
Oh, I don't have a motion drafted, because I thought we weren't doing motions at this.
Well, we can direct staff and committee of the whole. So staff be requested to reach out to the Community Foundation.
Funding.
Yeah,
I
regarding.
have that more as an informal note, but we can
Yeah.
get a motion for
Yeah.
sure.
Regarding possible funding for Birch, and report back to the February 11th meeting.
I'll move that.
And I'll second it.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Now, I had a follow-up question,
Okay,
nothing to do with the vote.
okay.
You
it's
mentioned
unanimous.
something about Van City
Mhm.
Foundation,
Yeah.
so that's not in the 22,000. You've got
No,
a-
so what was in my original application, which was back in October, we
Yeah.
were hoping to apply for CMHC funding.
Okay.
And that's what we thought we'd be aiming for, but we were told, it seems like now they're not going for sort of smaller amounts, which is like the 20-30, which is kind of what we're looking for. They're going for like 50 and 100 to kind of get you through that first big wave of architecture and engineering and all that stuff. They're doing it in bigger chunks,
Okay.
which is why we aren't quite there yet. Whereas I think maybe a few years ago, we needed a littler chunk, we could have gone in steps, but.
And the Van City Foundation amount in.
Yeah, this is one of their mandates, and they're very supportive of us from everything they've said, so like I said, I'm
You
hoping.
just don't know yet how much you might get.
It's in that ballpark of somewhere around 15 plus or minus, that's what we've applied for, and we're waiting to hear back, but verbally, they've been very positive.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Robin.
Okay,
Sorry.
thanks so much for your time.
We're on to
Thank you.
more
Thank
successful.
you, Robin.
Thank you.
And board members.
Yes, indeed, all the board members. wraps up the committee of the whole meeting. We'll go back to our regular agenda at this time. And the new business, so we're down to 11.1, which is Metro Vancouver Director David Hawking update.
Okay. The last meeting was almost entirely a closed meeting, so there's not a lot to talk about, but there were a couple of interesting little bits. One, it was the population trends. There's some work that they're doing on population trends to support the new regional growth strategy.
Yeah.
And so they anticipate that population would grow about, within the region, about 30,000 a year, and that's almost entirely immigration across, from outside the province. There's also within province immigration, but the population otherwise would be stable. It's immigration basically. But interesting because around there's basically an urban growth boundary. So there's limited land. So the housing is expected to move from, right now, single family homes are about 30% of the region, expected to drop fairly quickly to about 15%. So it's sort of moving towards multifamily because of demographics, affordability, density, and no land.
Density,
yeah. So it's density for everybody. The other thing, Paul Henderson, the head of solid waste, brought up the issue of organics becoming such an issue because of facilities closing. So that in the coming meetings of the waste committee, they'll look at options around food waste processing. So something might come of that. And I also had a conversation with him about us doing some composting, and I'll talk about that when we get into the composting discussion on that agenda. The other thing that happened, and so it was a closed meeting, went on for hours and hours, and it was minutes before we were about to close, and we thought the meeting was over, and they said, nope, we got one more thing, and so people came around and gave us some orange closed meeting paper, and it was, very sadly, the retirement of Carol Mason.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Is that public knowledge?
Yes,
It is now. It is now.
Sure it is.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
it was right as she then informed staff in the next few minutes, sort of thing. So yeah, it's I mean, I know Carol really quite well, and I ended up giving a little speech at the meeting. They asked if anyone wanted me to speak, and so I did. Because I knew I was on the board with the previous CAO, then on staff with the previous CAO, then on staff with Carol, and then on the board with Carol. And Carol was an unbelievable difference. Like the work was so well done. Delegation was really good. Transparency was. I mean, she's been a fabulous leader. So it's really sad. But she'll be there until July or so. So we've got a little bit of time still. Because we've invited them over here on some issues. So we make sure we use her well when we get here.
That's not much time for replacement, though.
No, so we also approved starting the process for replacement, and there'll be a committee that looks into it, and so on.
Do we know where she's going? Is she
She's retiring.
She's retiring.
She's retiring. She said, I'm not doing something else. I'm not going consulting. Somebody might offer me some work. Those are her quote. But she said, I'm retiring. I mean, her husband lives over on the island.
I was thinking, she's from Nanaimo.
She's from Nanaimo, so she goes back on Friday nights, lives by herself. Says her husband packs up all kinds of food for her each week, and she puts it in the freezer.
Oh.
Yeah, so it was a tough life, and she did a great job, and anyway, that's the Metro report.
All right. And Sue, over to you for the trust report.
Sure, okay. Islands Trust-wide, I just got back from Hornby on Friday, and so I'm getting around to the different islands, and I will bring ideas and back. Tomorrow I'll be at the Islands Trust Conservancy meeting, so I'm hoping to bring the work of the Islands Trust Conservancy, which is around protecting lands and monitoring covenants and things like this, that maybe there's partnerships or things that we could do with that as well. They, I think it's 32.5 hectares of Bowen Island are either nature reserve or conservation covenants right now, and there's lots more information because it's the Islands Trust budget consultation period has opened, and so there's lots of information on the website. The budget will be, the Bowen contribution has come down a little bit from earlier, another little bit, And, but it
Down
is
to
just,
what?
I'm sorry, I didn't bring that here because I ended up not breaking for dinner, so those
Oh, there you
are
go.
papers on my
Price
desk.
paid.
Sorry. But I don't think I've got that here. But I will be happy to answer any questions, and there is, for the consultation part, people can write in, obviously, or email, but there's also an online survey that has a ton of information in it. It's much more fun and easier to do. That's it. At the website, and I'm hoping we can post it. I think we may have already posted it to our,
If not,
I
we'll
can
make
check
sure.
with
Yeah.
Sophia, yeah.
yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw it on there. Because I think ours is posted, Bowen Island Municipalities consultation is posted as well. Is it?
I'm not sure if it's posted on the website. If it isn't yet, it will be very shortly. We
Yeah.
are planning on doing consultation on the week of February the 13th, I believe.
Okay.
Well, it's
So-
Valentine's Day.
Pardon? No, I made sure we were,
Yeah, that's
I
right.
can get the same participation as last year if I did on
Yeah.
Valentine's Day.
Anyway, they're running about the same time because
Okay.
the budgets are on the same
Yeah.
track.
But the same.
And I'm putting together information specific to Bowen, but it probably won't come out till next week. But the period is open, the consultation period is open till February the 11th. And the kinds of things that Bowen, I can just, that Bowen local benefits of the Islands Trust are things like protecting the beauty and the nature and the wildlife and our unique island community, because they protect, there's a lot of advocacy around the protecting the Salish Sea that we're in. There's a tax exemption program for anybody who is thinking about taxes at budget consultation time. Nature reserves on Bowen, which I've mentioned, some reconciliation, a bunch of digital mapping, and the regional conservation plan that comes out of that. So there's a whole bunch of information about Bowen on how and where our sensitive ecosystems are, and the old forests, which are up in the area slated to be logged, and a whole bunch of information, including the eelgrass mapping, things like that. Advocacy around oil spills, the well water workshops and groundwater information is coming. Well water workshop we had, but there's still that information is on the website if anybody wants to see it. Help with the rural grant funding, opposing logging on town lands, and many things like that. So I'll be putting together a little list, Bowen specific list, because the consultation is general to the Islands Trust. Here we go.
Good, excellent.
That's my report.
Great, thank you very much, Dawn.
So the budget amount that I saw was some $332,000.
Yeah.
Versus 293,000
Last year.
Yeah.
And I didn't see anything when I read through all the consultation documents, which I know was there last year, was trying to explain
The increase.
It's
Well, I think it's the 8%.
No, 18% is, we're actually slightly lesser now. It was 18.7 and it's gone to 18.6 or something. So
If you go to the very last page, there's a note under it that, and the very last page talks about the Bowen there's one page, it may be in the survey, but I think it's on the consultation documents.
I didn't go
It's
through
the
the whole
Bowen-
survey and.
It's the
Yeah.
Bowen contribution over the years. It's
Ah.
fascinating.
Oh,
Look at
yeah,
that.
from 65,000 to 332,000.
That's right, but it also shows the percentages, and there's a note at the bottom, I think it's note 2.
Yeah,
That
but,
explains some of it. But it's not just property values, it's also that the allocation, which Allison knows all about, having been crafting it for many years, the Islands Trust is beginning to spend in the last year or two a little bit more on trust-wide administration and Islands Trust Conservancy. Islands Trust Conservancy is the other arm of the Islands Trust, and so spending a little bit more in those directions are things that Bowen participates in, as opposed to local planning for the other islands, which we don't pay into.
Correct.
We don't, so because the emphasis is shifting a little bit, more spending, our calculation goes up a little bit, is how I understand it. Allison's made a bunch of good input already about, should the elections costs come out of,
well, we don't pay for the election costs, but they charge them to trust area services, which increases our percentage allocation of administration costs, so.
that's what I,
And I'm saying I want them to put them into local planning.
yeah,
It's a small number for this year, but in the election year, it's a
Yeah.
bigger number.
yeah.
But our percentage has gone from 13% to 18%, but that's a 18.6, but that's a 5% increase, but 5% of 300,000 is
Yeah.
only $15,000, so that's not,
The
you
total
know,
amount.
over the years, that's not the difference between 65 and 332, so.
Anyway, I'll send all the info around.
Yeah,
I'll send
thank you.
those, but I'm gonna make everybody have all the info that you may want me and more.
But I do think that you have to go through the survey in order to find the discussion about the different items, which I don't think is very easy for people to actually read. Last time there was a
When we
2-3
did, during the last
report, yeah.
session, we did a survey, and you could take it many different ways, about how people wish to be consulted and what they prefer, and there was a lot of people that preferred online surveys.
Oh, I don't have a
So-
problem with the survey. My problem is all the information you need to fill out the survey is in the survey itself, rather than a 3-pager before the survey.
I can provide you with all the different kinds that are there, and hopefully, if there's something missing, please contact me.
Perfect. On that happy note, we'll adjourn
Yep.
the regular agenda, and we'll move on to the closed council meeting of today. So the approval of the agenda.
We've got public hearings and special
Oh,
hearings.
yeah, public. Well, I don't know, do we have public comment?
No, we
In a
have
closed
Thank you
agenda.
very much. Question period.
Bye.
Oh, that's it, eh?